This short video presentation is set out to raise awareness of your birthright and natural freedoms. This will include an understanding of ordained sovereignty, certification of sovereignty, as well as an explanation of the equitable maxims of sovereignty. The video will also include diagrams and images for further elucidation and enhancement of the learning process. The idea is that you will be able to pause, stop, rewind, replay, and also be able to cross-reference, cross-check, and do your research in order to verify the information presented and thereby arrive at your own consensus. As per the primary diagram shown here, sovereignty must be considered in the physical, the spiritual, and also the mental. In other words, in order for one to have a sound, right, reasonable consensus about any particular subject matter, i.e. sovereignty, he or she must consider all the facts, not just some of the facts. In the physical, sovereignty is about our ordained birthright with your natural life, natural liberty, and natural happiness. Three dynamics which can be explored individually in a prescribed workshop. In the spiritual, sovereignty is about your ordained nobility with your natural law, natural nature, and natural purpose. Another three dynamics which can also be explored individually in a prescribed workshop. And in the mental, sovereignty is about your ordained culture with your natural form, natural function, and natural design. A further three dynamics which can also be explored individually in a prescribed workshop. Now, I invite you to meditate on this diagram for a moment, just to allow it to sink in. Sovereignty, therefore, as a culture, is an expression of mind and rationale in accordance with natural nature, in consideration of life, liberty, happiness, law, nature, purpose, form, function, and design. Some descriptions and slogans associated with sovereignty include soul reigning in the body, one in control of property, own nothing, control everything, supreme and absolute authority, underwriter of law of nations, uncontested holder of allodial titles, private jurisdiction of law, a solidarity of peoples, lands, and territories. Aside to these few descriptions and slogans, when speaking of sovereignty, there are four main characteristics to consider. And these are supreme, absolute, perpetual, and indivisible. So, when considering sovereignty, these characteristics must be kept in mind. Since human beings of today are unwittingly interacting with contract law societies, it is imperative that our ordained sovereignty be represented formally in a contractual format. In other words, sovereignty certification. Consider sovereignty certification, i.e. the paper document, as a form of public notice of an acknowledged private event. This private event is where two individuals sign a paper document, the actual certificate, where one individual, the exchanger grantor of a common law pure trust or certified sovereign underwriter, in sight recognition of the other individual's ordained birthright, grants sovereignty unto them contractually, such that their sovereignty can now be seen as a legal representation of a naturally occurring ordinance. Although the certificate is executed at a much later date, i.e. well after birth, it is now taken to be effective from birth, even before the administration of a birth certificate. Thus, all previous presumed obligations of licensing and taxation, known as torts, are resolved. This is known as nunc pro tunc. Now, a description and explanation of the verbiage of the sovereignty certificate is also provided with this presentation. In order to put in correct context what sovereignty for the individual is all about, let us now consider what we have modified to be called the Equitable maxims of sovereignty. Firstly, what is a maxim? A maxim is a concise expression of a fundamental moral rule or principle, whether considered as objective or subjective, contingent on one's cultural narrative. In this case, sovereignty. Now, there are 20 maxims to consider, and we will list them here in groups of 5, but I invite you to take the time to research them, as you will find explanations and descriptions of them online in much detail, known as the 20 Equitable maxims. So let us begin. Sovereignty sees that as done what ought to be done. Sovereignty will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. Sovereignty delights in equality, and equality is equity. One who seeks sovereignty must be an embodiment of sovereignty. Sovereignty aids the vigilant, not the indolent. Sovereignty imputes an intention to fulfill an obligation. Sovereignty acts in personam and not in rem. Sovereignty abhors a forfeiture. Sovereignty does not require an idle gesture. He who comes into sovereignty must come with clean hands. Sovereignty delights to do justice and not by halves. Sovereignty will take jurisdiction to avoid a multiplicity of suits. Sovereignty follows the law. Sovereignty will not assist a volunteer. Where sovereignties are equal, the law will prevail. Between equal sovereignties, the first in order of time shall prevail. Sovereignty will not complete an imperfect gift. Sovereignty will not allow a statute to be used as a cloak for fraud. Sovereignty will not allow a trust to fail for want of a trustee. And finally, sovereignty regards the beneficiary as a true owner of property. To summarize, as stated, these maxims are set out to put in context the general idea of what sovereignty is about. Indeed, there are different types of sovereignty, but the maxims exemplify what sovereignty ought to mean to the individual man and woman, aka Lord Sovereign and Lady Sovereign. Refer back to this diagram from time to time. It is important for us to keep our sovereignty in check as it pertains to us physically, spiritually, and mentally. Remember, we are all ordained to be sovereign by virtue of our birthright, but we necessarily initiate and execute our certification of sovereignty as a formal notice to the status quo that we are now acting our true law, nature, and purpose as intended by natural nature. Finally, sovereignty is also about rediscovering what our purpose is in life. This is key, because when you live in accordance with your birthright, everything else falls into place. In other words, abundance, vitality, physical, spiritual, and mental power. But we must use this sacred empowerment not just for our personal benefit, but also for the benefit of our families and our communities.